Communication. Effective communication skills are vital for the professional nurse because miscommunication has been cited as a key issue in safety in a healthcare organization. There are various communication models. Shannon and Weaver is a technical communication model that is linear and consists of 6 different steps: a sender, an encoder, a channel, decoder, receiver, and noise. The sender starts the message. The encoder is how the message is transmitted. The channel is how the encoder transmits the message. The decoder changes the signal back to the message. The receiver gets the message. Noise is an environmental distraction that can interfere with messaging. Schramm modified the Shannon-Weaver model to 3 components: a sender, receiver, and a message. This model suggests that communication is an engaged process where the sender and the receiver send messages back and forth and receive feedback from one another. Feedback allows both the sender and the receiver to demonstrate that the message was received properly. Berlow's SMCR model is sender, message, channel, and receiver. In this model, the elements that affect messages are included to illustrate how they aid or hinder effective communication. The sender begins the message. The message is topic transmitted. The channel is the method in which the message is sent, and the receiver gets the message that is transmitted. This is a one-way process for communication, and it doesn't include any feedback like other communication models. Verbal communication is what is said, and nonverbal communication is physical gestures, also known as body language. These are important among the healthcare team and nurses, the clients, and their families. Body language is seen as intentional or an unconscious display of one's feelings. The nurse must consider culture, age, language, physical deficits, and developmental levels when looking at each individual's communication style. Auditory communication is what the receiver hears when the sender speaks the message. This also includes the speed and the tone of the voice that the receiver perceives. Emotional communication refers to the speaker's emotional state conveying a message. This can be transferred to the receiver, and it affects how the message is accepted. Maintaining caring and a compassionate attitude, demonstrating empathy when communicating, will both help the nurse's message be received more positively by the client. There are several techniques that are used to improve communication: silence, active listening, asking open-ended questions, being accepting, providing recognition, restating, summarizing, and reflecting. When used, each of these can help build a trusting relationship in the nurse-client relationship, and it can also encourage open communication. Restating, paraphrasing, and summarizing require that the nurse repeat the message to ensure that there's been no misunderstanding between the nurse and the client. Reflection is often comparable to restating, but here the nurse attempts to reveal the feelings behind the client's message. Accepting and acknowledging the nurse has heard and understood the client is vital in effective communication. Verbal communication occurs face-to-face or over the telephone. Members of the baby boomer generation rely mainly on this communication mode to convey messages back and forth. Nonverbal is eye contact, facial gestures, posture, and overall appearance. These can either support what is being said or can contradict what is being said. Electronic messaging includes emailing, texting, video conferencing, and social media. This type of communication can lead to privacy violations due to mistakes from typographical errors and distractions. The Joint Commission has required the use of secure messaging when transmitting client information. This is to help maintain client confidentiality and decrease HIPAA violations. According to the HIPAA security rule, any electronic communication that contains personal health information must have, number one, the user must have personalized logins that can be monitored. Number two, the system must have an automatic log-off function if it is left unattended. And number three, personal health information sent as an attachment must be indecipherable if it is intercepted by another party. Written communication may be a letter, an email, or a computer-based post. The lack of body language and other nonverbal cues can make it difficult for the recipient to determine the tone and may lead to misunderstandings, even with the use of emoticons or avatars. Passive communication style has a developed pattern to avoid conflict, expressing feelings or emotions, or standing up for oneself when the boundaries are crossed. Some novice nurses will demonstrate this type of communication when they are faced with confronting a provider or an authority figure because they often lack confidence being a new nurse. Assertive communicators advocate for opinions, rights, and needs without violating the rights of others. Assertive communication is considered fundamental for good communication, mental health, and healthy relationships. Assertive communication and communicators use I statements and not you statements that is often associated with blaming. Aggressive communicators develop a pattern of expression that is verbally and oftentimes physically abusive. These type of communicators will tend to blame the receiver using you statements. The passive-aggressive communicator will appear passive on the surface. However, the individual will act out in anger in subtle, indirect, or secretive way from the feelings of powerlessness and resentment, often using sarcasm or witty responses. Physiological factors such as hearing loss or vision loss can prevent effective communication. Cognitive, intellectual, or developmental deficits, like autism, can influence the ability to effectively communicate. Environmental factors are considered as excessive noise, extreme temperatures, lighting. These can all act as a distraction for effective communication. Situational issues that cause strong emotions, like fatigue, anxiety, or fear. Cultural and demographic factors, language, religion, sexual orientation, age, gender, the nurse's own cultural competency or biases, an inequitable access to health care, and minorities being underrepresented among caregivers can all influence communication. This relationship has been defined by 4 phases identified by Pavlov's theory of interpersonal relationships. These are orientation, identification, exploitation, and resolution or termination. Orientation is the initial phase where the client will reach out to a nurse or a healthcare provider for assistance. Identification is when the 2 individuals establish a mutually respectful relationship. Exploitation is the active phase of the relationship where the nurse will educate to change the situation or the behavior. Resolution or termination is the final phase where the issue has been resolved and the relationship is terminated until the next event. Throughout this whole nurse-client relationship, the nurse acts as a guide to help the client receive the needed care. Motivational interviewing is a form of therapeutic communication known as OARS, O-A-R-S. This acronym stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, which are positive comments to help build the receiver's self-esteem and confidence, reflective listening, and summarizing.